Imagine this. The most powerful man in the world stands behind a podium and forgets where he is. He freezes mid-sentence. His team rushes in, adjusts the cameras, and quietly changes his schedule. Now imagine that same team doing everything in their power to make sure you never find out just how bad it really was. This isn't a partisan hit piece. It's a question every American, left, right, or center, should be asking. Did the White House knowingly hide the president's cognitive decline from the public? And if so, how far did that cover up go? Because this isn't just about Joe Biden. This is about the presidency itself. The trust, the chain of command, and who's actually calling the shots when the cameras turn off. Tonight, we're diving deep into the timeline, the insiders who sounded the alarm, the evidence that was buried, and the one question no one in Washington wants to answer. Was the president the one still making the decisions, or were decisions being made for him? This is the cognitive cover-up. But before we get into that, make sure you like and subscribe, and then comment down below what you want to hear about next. To understand the story, we need to start with the timeline. In June 2024, a presidential debate raised eyebrows nationwide. Viewers noticed pauses, repeated phrases, and moments of confusion. For many, it wasn't just a stumble. It looked like something more serious. Months earlier, in February, the White House released a routine medical summary. On the surface, it painted a picture of health and fitness. But there was a notable omission. Formal cognitive testing results were nowhere to be found. That absence alone sparked questions from lawmakers and medical experts alike. Over the next year, investigative journalists in several books, most notably Kamala Harris's memoir, shed light on what was happening behind the scenes. Harris writes candidly about the concerns raised within the administration, describing discussions about how to manage the president's schedule, appearances, and public image, specifically to avoid exposing any cognitive vulnerabilities. It wasn't just whispers in the press. Congressional hearings in 2025 brought light to the use of an AutoPen, an electronic signature device that the president allegedly used to sign official documents. Lawmakers questioned whether this tool was being used because the president wasn't always able to review or sign paperwork himself. By piecing together public reports, insider accounts, and official hearings, a troubling picture begins to emerge. Moments on camera that suggested cognitive decline, paired with behind-the-scenes management, and questions about tools being used to govern. So what do we actually know? Let's separate the public record from speculation. First, there are the visible moments, debate performances, public speeches, and press conferences that raised concern. On multiple occasions, observers noted pauses, repetition, and apparent confusion. While some called these normal aging, others saw them as a sign of cognitive decline. Then there's the medical record, or rather, the parts of it that were made public. The February 2024 White House medical summary described routine physical exams and general health, but it did not include formal cognitive testing like a MOCA or MMSE. That absence drew criticism from independent physicians and lawmakers who argued that such testing should be standard for any president over 80. Several journalists, relying on interviews with the former aides and insiders, reported that the White House was actively managing appearances. Decisions about when the president would speak, which events he would attend, and even which questions he would answer were influenced by concerns over cognitive performance. Kamala Harris's memoir explicitly touches on this. She recounts private conversations where concerns were raised about the president's memory, focus, and decision-making under pressure. Harris writes that these conversations led to careful scheduling and management strategies, steps intended to maintain the image of a fully capable commander-in-chief. Finally, there's the AutoPen controversy. Congressional hearings in 2025 revealed that the president sometimes signed official documents electronically using this device. Lawmakers questioned whether it was a convenience or a necessity. Was the device protecting the president's time, or was it being used because he was unable to review documents personally? The question remains unanswered, but it has serious implication for transparency and constitutional authority. Taken together, the public moments, the omissions in medical reporting, the insider accounts, and the use of the AutoPen paints a picture that raises real questions. Was the American public fully informed about the president's cognitive health? And if not, what does that mean for accountability at the highest level of government? To understand how this all happened, we have to look at the people behind the scenes. First, the president himself. He's at the center. But as any administration knows, the public rarely sees the full picture of what goes on inside the White House. The question is whether the president was fully in control of his schedule, briefings, and decisions, or if others were stepping in more than the public realized. Next is the White House medical team. The official physician is tasked with both caring for the president and reporting on his health. Critics argue that the omission of formal cognitive testing in the public medical summary was a deliberate choice, while defenders say it was standard privacy and discretion. Either way, it's a key piece of the puzzle. Then there are the senior aides and the communications staff. According to multiple insider accounts and reporting, these individuals had influence over what the public saw and didn't see. They reportedly shaped appearances, controlled press access, and even advised on which questions the president would answer in public settings. Kamala Harris also appears as a key observer in her memoir. She detailed private discussions where concerns about memory lapses and focus were raised. These conversations, she suggested, led to deliberate decisions to manage the president's public image in a way that downplayed potential cognitive issues. And we can't overlook Dr. Jill Biden, a doctor herself, intimately involved in the president's life and daily routines. It's almost impossible to imagine she wasn't aware of any cognitive concerns. Her presence adds another layer. If the spouse of the president, a professional trained in education and health, was a part of managing appearances, it underscores how comprehensive the effort to protect the president's public image may have been. Finally, congressional oversight committees and journalists serve as the external checks. In 2025, hearings exposed the use of the AutoPen for signing official documents, a revelation that prompted lawmakers to question whether decisions were truly being made by the president or if aides were acting on behalf without the public knowing. When you connect all these threads, the president, his doctors, senior staff, Dr. Jill Biden, and oversight bodies, a pattern emerges. A careful, deliberate management of appearances. One that raises the question of whether transparency was sacrificed for image. And that is what makes this more than just a story about age. It's a story about trust, accountability, and the functioning of the highest office in the United States. One of the most explosive revelations from congressional hearings in 2025 was the use of the AutoPen. For those unfamiliar, it's an electronic signature device, a tool that allows documents to be signed automatically. On the surface, it's a convenience. But in this context, it raises serious questions. Lawmakers revealed that the president wasn't the only person with access to the AutoPen. Senior staffers could also use it. That fact sparked concerns in Congress. How could anyone verify that every document signed with the AutoPen was actually signed by the president himself? Some hearings even suggested that certain pardons signed using the AutoPen might not have had his direct authorization, leading the House Oversight Committee to state that those pardons could be considered void. This distinction matters enormously. Every signature carries legal weight. Every executive order, every memo, every pardon has real consequences. If aides were effectively signing on the president's behalf, even with nominal approval, it raises serious constitutional and transparency issues. Who is actually making decisions at the highest level of government? Combined with the other evidence, the public moments showing cognitive struggle, the White House's management of appearances, insider accounts, and Dr. Jill Biden's oversight, the AutoPen becomes more than just a tool. It symbolizes the potential for decision-making to shift away from the president entirely, all while the public assumes he's in control. This isn't speculation for dramatic effect. These hearings, the statements, and the documented discussions exist in the public record, and they force every American to ask, when the leader of the free world may be impaired and aides can sign documents in his name, how do we know what decisions are truly his? How do we know the country is being governed transparently or responsibly? So why should every American care about what's been happening behind the scenes in the White House? First, it's about trust. The presidency is not just a figurehead role. It's the highest decision-making office in the country. Americans deserve to know whether the person making life-altering decisions is fully capable. When information about his cognitive health is withheld, trust in the office itself erodes. Second, it's about accountability. If aides are managing the president's schedule, controlling his public appearances, and even using the AutoPen to sign documents on his behalf, it raises a serious question. Who is actually making the decision that affects 330 million people? Accountability matters, not just for politics, but for the rule of law and the functioning of democracy. Third, there are constitutional implications. The House Oversight Committee's statement about potentially void pardons and other signed documents highlight a real legal gray area. If a president's signature can be applied by staff, even with good intentions, it calls into question the validity of critical executive actions. That's not theoretical. That's real world. That has real world consequences for governance, justice, and national security. Finally, it's about precedent. How administrations handle cognitive health, transparency, and delegation of authority sets the stage for future presidents. If this pattern is normalized, future leaders might hide cognitive struggles, rely more heavily on aides for decisions, or avoid scrutiny entirely. Americans have the right to demand clear, enforceable standards for transparency at the highest level. In short, this isn't just a story about one man's health. It's a story about the integrity of the presidency, the safety of the decisions being made, and the right of the American people to know who is really in charge. The story of the cognitive cover-up is not just about one president. It's about the office he holds, the people around him, and the transparency that every American deserves. From public moments of cognitive struggle to the White House managing appearances behind the scenes, to insider accounts and Kamala Harris's candid memoir, to Dr. Jill Biden's involvement, and finally, the controversial use of the AutoPen. It all raises serious questions. Questions about who is actually making decisions, who is accountable, and how the country can ensure the integrity of its highest office. This investigation doesn't claim to diagnose anyone, but it does highlight gaps in transparency, oversight, and accountability that demand attention. And as citizens asking these questions, it isn't just our right, it's our responsibility. If you found this investigation revealing, make sure to like and subscribe, and then comment down below which parts of government transparency, presidential accountability, or political oversight do you want us to dive into next. Your questions will guide the investigation, because at the end of the day, the health of a president is more than a personal matter. It's a matter for the nation. Thank you for watching. I'm Kyle Fields, and I'll see you next time. Take care.